President Millibar, we can proceed.
Okay, I would like to call to order the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority Board meeting for June 18th, 2025 at the time of 1:32. Should we do the roll call?
Gladly, President Millibar. All right, starting with President Millibar. Director Estremera.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Martin.
Here.
Thank you. Director Luna.
Present.
Thank you. Director Chang.
Here.
Thank you. Director Naftawi.
Present.
Thank you. Director Weed.
Here.
Thank you. And I do want to acknowledge that in the room, we do have alternate director Jackie McMillan. Online, we have alternate director Dennis Lamoureux, and I believe, oh, and alternate director Plinsky is also in the audience here in person. Thank you.
Okay, we will move to closed session and we anticipate starting the open session at approximately 2 p.m. So we'll close first. Closed session.
Director Luna, we couldn't hear you very well.
Oh, sorry.
It's these audios. Is Director McMillan there in person?
Director McMillan is here in person.
Oh, then if she could please attend the closed session, not myself, that would be better. Since
What-
only one.
But yeah, this is Catano. Am I invited to this closed session or not? Should I sign off?
Katana, if you'd like to join us, absolutely. We'll make sure the link is forwarded. And Director
Okay.
Luna, yes, we'll have alternate Director McMillan attend the closed session in your place. Thank you for letting us know.
Thank you.
Okay, you can forward that to me then.
And I do want to confirm, President Millibar, that we did not receive public comment for this item.
Yeah, I didn't get to number 5 yet. That would be once we open the meeting, right?
So President Milbar, no, technically we could receive public comment on closed session, even though it's, we historically have not. So Ms. Rodriguez is just confirming we haven't received public
Okay.
comment for that item, and we can move into closed session when you're ready.
Okay, we'll move to closed session. Thank you.
President Millibar, the room is ready.
President Milbar, just a second. We're still waiting for the Metro. Apologies. We're good to go whenever you're ready. Thank you.
I'll reconvene from closed session. Josh, any report out of closed session?
No reportable action. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to open the meeting and pledge of allegiance. Okay, we're on the item 5, where public comments can be made by anyone. They can use *9, they can use the hand, or those present can let Claudia know if they have a public comment. Do we have any public comments?
President Millibar, we have not received any public comment requests.
Okay, very good. So we'll move on to item 6A, minutes of the May 21st, 2025 meeting. Do we have-
Motion, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we need a roll call or, okay?
Roll call, please.
President Millibar,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Director Luna. Oh.
Aye.
Director Stamera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Maybe a question for our legal counsel. I was not here last month, so do I recuse or?
You're permitted to vote yes, or you can recuse. It's up to you.
Okay, aye.
Director Anaptawi,
Yes.
and Director Weed. Meeting minutes approved. President Millibar, before we proceed, I do want to acknowledge that Director Luna has requested that alternate Director McMillan stand in for him today. So Director McMillan has joined you at the dais. Josh, is there?
No, the only thing I would add is the Metropolitan Water District teleconference location, which is noticed on the agenda, will remain a meeting. Director McMillan will be voting on behalf of Metropolitan Water District. Thank you.
Yep. The site is open, so we're still here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good.
We can proceed.
Okay. Item 7A, the monthly report. Graham, please begin.
Sure, Chair Millibar, thank you very much. So I'll start with our executive summary. Focusing on really the main 3 points, again, just trying to keep it boiled down to high level emphasis areas. We continue our support of DWR's ongoing permit efforts, which currently still engaged in change and point of diversion hearings at the State Water Resources Control Board. Secondly, we're really focused on the engineering studies necessary to advance the overall project design, considering potential refinements, updating the cost estimate, and preparing a basis of design report that will support that updated cost estimate. All of that information, along with updated economic feasibility analyses, are anticipated for early 2027. So we've got about a year and a half to move the overall project design forward, that 10%, prepare that associated documentation, and then transition into cost estimating and economic analysis. And then lastly, the internal activities focused again on that 2027 timeframe as the potential timeframe to transition into that delivery implementation phase. And so really focusing on the internal requirements necessary within the DCA to efficiently make that transition, to go from the planning and permit support work that's been our priority for the last several years to transitioning into that implementation delivery phase. Got quite a bit of work to do internally, and that's just going to continue to be a key focus area for us over the next year and a half, 2 years. In terms of our budget performance for this fiscal year, on the upper right-hand side of the executive summary, you just see it by quarter. We've been tracking under for quarters, what would be the first and second quarter of the fiscal year. Those are Q3 and Q4 of 2024. We've definitely picked up here in Q1 of 25. We had anticipated the field work, if we were out there doing it, would be stepping down through that period of time. But at the same time, we're really ramping up on a lot of the activities I'm describing in the previous focus, those internal work activities to get ourselves in position. So this Q1 follows many of the agencies voting to approve the next phase funding to fund us entirely through 2027. And so we have a clear mandate now to get ready for delivery phase and be ready for the implementation decisions that we expect hopefully to come in 2027. So that uptick in activities really reflects that very clear mission. So overall funding performance, the budget for this year, $43 million. We have committed 34.7 through task orders and contracts and have incurred to date 26.3 million. Our estimate at completion. So just reminding the board that we do trail a little bit in terms of our financials, because what we currently report as incurred costs are invoices that have been received and accepted as appropriately submitted, and then begin the processing. So they tend to lag a bit just in terms of getting those invoices submitted and processed. We do actually plan in the next fiscal year to transition away from that approach for progress reporting. We're separating our progress report requirements into an early monthly deliverable from each of our vendors so that we can provide consistent, more up-to-date information in the monthly report and not be relying on the information being associated with the invoices, which can take a bit longer to fully resolve and accept. But for now, we're still using the old process. So although we're 26.3 million incurred, by the time we fully receive all invoices through June, we expect the estimate at completion to be around 32.9 million for the fiscal year, which is about 23% underrun. That's been kind of the traditional pattern we've had for the past couple of years. But again, our real shift in mindset is to take on the next 2 calendar years, starting in 2026, focused on the work plan at hand, and really maximizing the resources and opportunities we have to get ourselves into that position. So, but the 23% underrun is what we're tracking and forecasting currently. Work progress, again, this is based largely on deliverables. We have a few task orders or contracts that don't have deliverables, but for those that do, we're sitting at about 81% complete on all of the work items identified through contracts versus 76% spent. Again, that's a little bit out of sync there just because of some of those, the timing issues that I reported on just a minute ago, but I do expect for the next fiscal year, we're going to be tightening all that up, aligning our deliverables and percent spent into the same monthly analysis. And so I expect starting in July, really starting in August, where we're reporting on July, we're going to start to have more tightened up, more recent information that's a little bit cleaner and better defined. In terms of our small business and disabled veteran business participation, 13%, value of 13% of all committed contracts designated small business or DVBE, and to date 9% of the invoiced amounts associated with those set aside type contracts. In terms of procurements, we have a couple still ongoing. We're standing up a new employee assistance program for the DCA. We have been talking about the executive strategic support services contracts. We actually have 3 on the agenda today that we are going to ask the board to award, and then another 5 intended for the August agenda. We're working on the Primavera PSIC cloud hosting platform. I think contract negotiations are almost done there. So we're very close to standing up our own Primavera P6 site that all the vendors can access and work from, as opposed to relying on our vendor platforms to access the scheduling software. That creates some collaboration challenges when you've got multiple vendors trying to access the same software. And then we've got various other business services, insurance, variety of other smaller contracts that we're working our way through. In terms of outreach, we've been pretty active so far. We had a very good presence at the Aqua conference down in Monterey. We were at California Water Association, Association for Women in Water, Energy and Environment, Waterwise breakfast of Ventura County, and then most recently at the Rapid Excavation and Tunneling Conference in Dallas. That was mostly an industry conference. A lot of folks very interested in the project, as you can imagine. So it was essentially a reintroduction of a project that many of those vendors, those tunneling contractors and designers are familiar with. But it's our view, it's time that they start paying a bit closer attention to this project and understanding the timeline and the details. It's not the same project as past iterations, and that's really the focus of our communications at this point. So President Millibar, that completes my update, but there's a lot of detail within the monthly report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or dig into any details should the board desire.
Are there any questions from the board? No questions? Any public comment on this?
President Millibar, there is no public comment request for this item, either online or in person here in the room.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to 7B, the amended travel policy. Can we start that with the staff report?
Thanks, President Millibar. I'll provide the initial staff report. So the item before you is an amendment to the DCA travel policy. And as a reminder, under the joint exercise of powers agreement with DWR, the DCA has the ability to reimburse contractors pursuant to a reimbursement or an expense policy, which is approved by this board and then concurred with by the department. And we have an existing policy. That existing policy is based on our historical rate methodology for our larger vendors. Those vendors have traditionally received an all-in multiplier, and that multiplier was a multiplier which was added to base labor, and that multiplier included reimbursement for expected travel and similar costs. What will be before you in the next and subsequent items is a modification of that approach. So beginning next fiscal year, staff is recommending that the board consider transitioning to a more traditional expense reimbursement practice. So rather than an all-in multiplier, any multiplier that's used will exclude travel and other direct costs. Those costs would be reimbursed as incurred. So enclosed is the amended travel policy. To make that change, there's both clean and red line versions in the packet. Just to highlight some of the important changes which are identified in the staff report. First, of course, is the change in general methodology. So previously, the prior travel policy expressed a preference for an all-in multiplier and then had an alternative option of direct reimbursement that now is flipped based on the proposed change in overall rates. Getting into some of the specifics of the amended policy, the first is consistent with the prior policy. We are utilizing federal GSA for rates and per diems. On meals and incidentals, the policy recommends defaulting to per diems as opposed to asking for receipt reimbursements for meals administratively. That's a little bit easier for us to manage. And then lastly, and this one is somewhat unique to our proposed policy, is hotel rates. So consistent with what I just discussed, generally hotel rates will be capped at the federal GSA rate for the location. However, we have identified one issue related to that. So the GSA rate for Sacramento is a regional rate and isn't specific to the downtown Sacramento hotel market. Unfortunately, the prevailing market for reasonable hotels in the area is generally higher than the GSA rate. One thing that Adrian Brown, our Chief Contracting Officer, has done is establish lower government/contract rates with hotels that are in the area. So the proposed policy would allow vendors to use those contract rates instead of the GSA rate. We do feel that overall this is absolutely in the best interest of the program, even if those rates are slightly higher, because having people being able to walk to the office as opposed to having to stay a little bit further out and travel, results in overall reduced cost on average to the program. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on the draft policy. Thank you.
Are there any questions go ahead.
Yeah, President Millibar, more a comment than the question. I appreciate Councilor Nelson, kind of talking about, the efforts of, I think our procurement officer to, lower or provide an alternative, because I completely agree. I think, sometimes in the effort to kind of save money by complying with the GSA rates, in the end, you may be, costing the project more, through lost time and so on. So fully appreciate, the effort that went into it. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Hearing none, any public comment?
Martin, I have
Oh, we have a question.
Josh and Graham. The words in the staff report refer to streamlining administration of expenses. What is your sense on the net cost change in this policy? Up, down, we don't know.
I think Director Martin, and so far it's about a net neutral change for the moment. We know that because we had developed our original draft budget back in that was discussed with the Finance Committee, the DCA Finance Committee in May 21st. Based on the old rate structure, we knew we were making this change, but we needed to issue the draft budget while we finalized the travel policy approach, and then migrate all of the rates over to the new structure, which was done for the most recent revision to the budget, shared again with the Finance Committee and now being considered by the board. In that change, we also introduced the on-site requirement expectations, which are now increasing compared to what we have been. We're now going to 3 days a week on-site expectations. And so associated with that, there is a necessary increase in expected travel costs for many of our off-site vendors who bring staff in from out of town. We did see a little bit of an increase in terms of the expenses associated with that increased travel expectation. But the magnitude of the increase, I think, is pretty in line with the increased on-site expectations. We've previously been on something equal to about 2 days a week, and now stepping up to 3 days a week. You would expect to see those travel costs, strictly those travel costs, increasing by a commensurate amount. And that is consistent with what we saw in moving to a direct reimbursement approach. I do think over time, we are going to find efficiencies through this process. I think that as part of the reason we're doing this now is we see that this next fiscal year's budget represents half of beginning in January, we've got the increased work plan starting in 2026 with quite a bit more work anticipated in 2026 and beyond. There's a lot of assumptions that have to be built into the multiplier all-inclusive approach. We have found it to be pretty time consuming on the staff side to go back through and review and validate those assumptions. And so I think we're going to end up net saving time and money in the long run, making this transition now. It's just a little bit like pulling off a Band-Aid and changing over all the systems and ensuring that we're closing out the old system in an appropriate way.
Thank you, Grant.
Okay, any other discussion? Is there any public comment on this item?
No public comment requests, President Millibar.
Okay, I will entertain a motion and a second on this amended travel policy.
Motion, Mr. Chairman.
We have a second? Okay, roll call vote, please.
President Millibar,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Alternate Director McMillan. Aye. Director Stamera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anaptawi,
Yes.
Director Weed. Resolution passes. Thank you.
And President Milmar, just to emphasize process on this one. So we appreciate the board approving this. This will now go to DWR for their sign off, and then it'll be effective. And on that point, we did share the draft with DWR and received their edits and comments, so we don't anticipate any issues. And I wanted to thank Carrie and her team for their thoughtful review and comment.
Okay, very good. Item 7C, public hearing on fiscal year 25-26 budget and related items. Can we begin with a staff report?
Yes, President Millibar, thank you. So attached to the board package is our staff memo and associated backup information. I'll just provide a summary of the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26, beginning July 1. The proposed budget is $65 million. It includes an unallocated reserve amount of $4.2 million. The specific focus areas are similar to what I just reported out in the monthly report, but I will elaborate a little bit more. We've got the ongoing permit support efforts, which again, currently are the change in point of diversion hearings, but will be transitioning to Delta Plan consistency with the Delta Stewardship Council. Similarly, or related to that, we're working very closely with the department's environmental team to develop the environmental compliance plan based on the environmental commitments and requirements that are being developed and assembled associated with the various regulatory processes. It's now time to clearly establish the compliance plan, the monitoring and reporting requirements. Some of the early activities that we anticipate really needing this program stood up and operational would be associated with field work, geotech, investigations, that sort of thing, which although currently enjoined, we do have high hopes that we'll be back in the field in the not too distant future, and therefore really need to have the environmental compliance and monitoring program fully established and ready for at least in a small scale version of implementation. The engineering analysis design documentation for what I described, the system-wide basis of design report, which will be used to feed a class 3 estimate to be released as part of next fiscal year. Part of that, and one that I didn't mention in the monthly report, is the ongoing development and effort associated with developing an overall program schedule. We've had a program schedule that we've been working with and refining. It's been a very useful tool, but we're to the point now where we're adding increasing amounts of detail, some of those related to the permit requirements, predecessors, activities that need to be completed under certain timeframes and windows, ensuring that we have all of that information programmed into the schedule in such a way that we can scenario test and evaluate the impacts of what is an ever-changing environment of schedule-related concerns. Some other items that we're really focused on, the design and construction refinements, how those may potentially impact the schedule, being able to communicate those and evaluate those in a way that's rigorous and quantitative. Evaluating potential data collection scenarios. So when and if are we able to get back out into the field on geotech efforts? How will we feather that work into the ongoing design efforts that we do anticipate in order to hold the overall schedule? Other potential considerations, contracting mechanisms. Also, we need to be able to fully vet and evaluate those through the schedule and understand the real clear benefits or drawbacks. And lastly, potential funding consideration scenarios, the timing and amount of various funding streams, being able to adjust the schedule and adjust the overall program plan and communicate that effectively is another key priority. So a lot of work to do on the schedule. It will be necessary to have an updated schedule to come with the updated cost estimate and then feeding into those economic feasibility analyses. So along with the basis of design report goes a much updated and improved overall program schedule. And then I already mentioned, again, the DCA standards, procedures, requirements to support the transition that we anticipate pending the PWA decisions to move forward with the project in 2027. So that will just continue to be a big internal effort that we're focusing on starting in the next fiscal year, or having already started, but continuing through into the next fiscal year. At the June 12th, 2025 Finance Committee meeting, the committee did vote by minute order to recommend to the board the adoption of this budget. So I do appreciate the committee's attention to detail and feedback in the process. So with that, President Millibar, that completes my staff report. We've got a lot of additional information I'd be happy to cover, but don't want to jump into that. I think I want to pause here and see what the board may want to do.
I think first I would recognize Director Martin headed up the Finance Committee process. Do you have any comments on what we were able to accomplish?
Yes, thank you, President Millibar. Yes, as you say, the Finance Committee that was made up of myself, President Millibar, and Committee Member Palmer. And we all remember Sarah Palmer. We haven't forgotten her. She was an active member of the committee, and we looked at, during 3 committee meetings, we looked at the methodology that was used to put together the budget. We looked at the initial draft of the budget in the second meeting. In the final meeting, we looked at the refined draft, and I believe added more detail and filled in some placeholder amounts that were missing in the initial draft. The committee spent a lot of time going over the methodology and the numbers that were presented, and we're satisfied that everything was based on a task order list for each of the consultants and team members. And the committee reached the conclusion that we were prepared to recommend adoption by the full board. So with that, President Millibar, I'd like to make the motion that we adopt the proposed FY 25-26 budget.
Okay, that would close the hearing. Is there any other comments before we close the hearing?
President Millibar, I apologize. I just had one comment. It's just a note. You'll notice in the staff report at the bottom, there was a reference to AB 2561. You may be familiar with this new law from your member agency. It's a requirement that prior to approval of the annual budget, that each local agency conduct a public hearing to discuss any vacancies as well as recruitment and retention efforts. This is largely inapplicable to us as we do not have any direct employees, but we always, ensure strict compliance with legal requirements. So the public hearing for this item will be both your public hearing on the annual budget as well as under AB 2561. I'm happy to answer any questions about those requirements.
Any questions of Josh on that?
President Millibar, we do have a question from our treasurer, Katano Kaseni, who's on the line.
Okay, can they proceed?
Yeah, good afternoon. So my question is not to Josh, thank you, it was really to Graham. so I'm assuming this is your budget beginning July 1 to June of next year?
That is correct, yes.
And I'm also assuming that the funding is already available, so you just have to work with the rest of us to submit funding?
Yeah,
That this is funding that's already approved within our budget, because I know our budget ends in that June. So if it's within June, I'm good. If it's outside, then I worry a little bit, but I know we've been approved at least through that time period.
Yes, Catano. So I don't want to speak for you, but you might be asking from two perspectives. And so I guess
Okay.
I'll just do my best to answer and then see if this clarifies things. Met along with all the other participating water agencies over the past year at this point, voted to authorize and approve funding for the program through the end of calendar year 27. And I do believe your staff, MWD staff, has been working closely with the Department of Water Resources. I'm looking at Carrie to see, to figure out and ensure that the payment associated with the statement of charges are synced up on that.
We have been working with the public water agencies to complete funding agreements. We have most of them complete, including Metropolitan Water District. We are working on the last few to make sure that that funding is fully laid out.
Yeah, okay, that would be great, because I in my mind, how DCA pays or don't pay until we get the money. So, and yes, I was asking from both sides, are we paying you? And from this side, more importantly, so we have the budget since it's starting July 1. So.
Yeah, and I think, Catano, I think we answered it, but do you feel like
No,
you see it from
I'm
both
good.
sides?
I'm good as long as you have money July 1.
We do have money July.
Okay.
That's
Thank
right. So we're still, just to clarify on that point, Catano, we're still working on the funds that were initially provided for planning and permit phase efforts. So those funds are going to extend us all the way through calendar year 25. So the first half of
Okay,
this upcoming fiscal year is continuing on
that's
with
good.
existing funds. Yeah. So that's probably another important point.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we have another question, Adrian.
Thanks. Just to confirm, I think you said it already, but all of the resolutions, the board votes have been taken. So right now you are just wrapping up funding agreements that are amendments to the existing, but the money is sort of committed already. It's just now administrative. I just want to confirm. Yeah.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One more.
One more?
One more quick comment, President Millibar. I would like to thank Sarah Palmer for her efforts in getting this through committee, and also to President Millibar for his efforts on behalf of the whole team to get this through to this point. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
On this item.
Pardon?
Is there a motion on this item we have to approve?
He made a motion.
And I'll second. If
Oh,
you need a second.
Okay, I just wanted to close the hearing correctly.
Yes, thank you. So
And is there any public comment?
President Millibar, there is not.
Okay. Second, roll call vote, please.
Gladly. President Millibar,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Alternate Director McMillan, Director Stamera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anaptawi,
Yes.
Director Weed.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Resolution passes to approve the budget.
Okay, very good. We'll move to item 7D, the investment policy. Graham, you're gonna start the staff report?
Yeah, just by asking Catano. Catano, are you covering that?
Hi, yes, I'm happy to cover this. So our investment policy requires the authority of the investment policy to have this board approve it annually. We have a slight change this time, just one change that we wanted to make sure we kept is the credit rating of our medium-term notes and corporate notes. It was about double, so A, we're increasing that credit from A to AA. Simply because I realize even in our investment policy that the threshold is so low that within one downgrade, we're in the BB category. So I wanted to make sure that we are buying investments. So this portfolio is not as active. We're not buying any investments of medium-term notes right now. But in the future, if indeed we start getting a lot of money, we might do that. Currently, the investment policy is really reflective of the wish of our future. The money that we have in cash, it's really mutual funds right now. We're not money market funds. We're not investing in medium-term notes. But to the extent that we do, I wanted the medium-term notes to reflect a double A credit versus a 1A credit, just in case there are downgrades. And that's the only change that we're making this time. And so that we want your approval for that change, and we also want your approval to continue to delegate authority to me as a treasurer to invest any funds for the DCA.
Are there any questions of Ms. Catano on that change? Any public comment on this item?
President Millibar, no public comment on this item.
Okay, we'll entertain a motion from the board
Move this.
in a second.
Chicken second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
President Millibar,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Alternate Director McMillan,
Aye.
Director Stamera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anaptawi,
Yes.
Director Weed.
Aye.
Resolution passes.
Okay, we'll move on to item 7E. The Deputy Executive Director Services Agreement with STV. Graham, are you gonna explain this one?
I will kick it off. President Millibar, and then Adrian Brown, our Chief Contracting Officer, will he has a presentation that covers the next three items around these contract awards, starting first with the contract you mentioned. But I'll hand it to Adrian, and then happy to answer any clarifying questions once the board hears Adrian's presentation.
Okay, please.
Good afternoon, DCA Board. Today we're presenting to you a brief presentation about the request for qualifications that was used to conduct an on-call executive strategic support services competitive solicitation. Next slide, please. The DCA's executive team does need some support, specifically with strategic advisory services. So in order to obtain those services, the DCA conducted a request for qualifications. Before you can see the four categories that were listed in the RFQ: executive strategic support services, facilitation services, deputy executive director services, and HR support services. Next slide, please. The request for qualifications went out in mid-March. The last day for the respondents to request questions was March the 28th. The statement of qualifications were due on April the 14th. Evaluations of the SOQs started on April the 22nd and concluded on May the 7th. The ranked proposals and recommendations shortlisted also concluded on May the 7th of 2025. Next slide. The selection criteria for the request for qualifications was essentially firm performance and experience, personnel performance and experience, technical understanding. The DCA received 9 responses or SOQs. The names of those respondents are listed to the right side of your screen. We received 9 responses. Next slide. An evaluation panel was formed. It consisted of 5 panel members: our executive director, DWR's environmental manager, Zone 7's general manager, our chief of staff and board clerk, and general counsel. The evaluation committee met several times, had multiple discussions, scored each of the firms based on the categories they submitted. After the final discussion, the panel recommended for the first set of awards for today's board meeting, the following firms: STV Incorporated for Deputy Executive Director Services, Project Neutral for Executive Strategic Support Services and Facilitation Services, CohnReznick Advisory for Executive Strategic Support Services. Before you is a list of the services that will be performed under Category 1, which is Executive Strategic Support Services. I like to call it Advisory Services. Any questions? Just on that one
Board?
category. Okay. The next category is Facilitation Services.
We're gonna do these one at a time or all three of them?
Well, I'm not quite yet finished presenting, but then once we get, we'll go through each of the motions independently. Yes.
Okay.
So the second category is solicitation services. The services are listed before you. Next slide, please. And the third category is Deputy Executive Director Services. And those services are listed in front of you as well. Okay, next slide, please. The DC undertook active negotiations with all three firms. And after we concluded negotiations with the firms, we came to the following results. In the RFQ packet, we also indicated that we would like to include optional language for additional terms or extensions of those terms. In front of you, you can see the basic summary of each of those contracts that are proposed. For Executive Director Services, we're recommending 7.8 million. For Project Neutral, we're recommending 750,000. And for CohnReznick, we're recommending 2.5 million. Next slide, please. Here it is again in very brief form, the basic proposed contracts amounts and the length of their terms, initial terms. Next slide. We're available for any questions.
Of the three resolutions.
Oh, yeah, thank you, President Milbar, and thank you, Mr. Brown. I guess maybe it's just my lack of familiarity with this particular, process. And I like the way you've kind of laid it out. So it seems like, we're asked to vote on, these three different contracts. So the first one, is it looking at organizational efficiencies? I guess I'm just trying to, distill it down into a little bit more layman terms and try to figure out the separation. So you're kind of going from top down, right? It feels like.
Yes, we started off with deputy executive director because that's the main initial need at this time.
Right.
And we're bringing on the firm STV Incorporated, a gentleman by the name James Morrison. He currently actually is an incumbent providing strategic advice. So it makes sense to move forward with his services. There were three firms that proposed under that category. And once the panel selected Mr. Morrison, the other three firms, we could move forward with that same category. In the board memo, it discusses the services that Mr. Morrison would provide through STV.
Okay, so you're going from the high level organization and then the facilitation, which is kind of making sure that I guess the policy directions that are set are executed, in the fashion that we envisioned to be. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, facilitation services will help engage with meetings between different groups within the DCA and its contractors and provide advice and meeting cadence.
Thanks. So Director Chang, if I could jump in and clarify. So there's two different, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're asking about the services that were initially listed that started first with strategic support, then facilitation, then deputy director, and then HR support. And so I appreciate what Adrian was describing. He was organizing it by what we view in the award priority, which we're moving the deputy director to the top in terms of our award priority. So I guess I just want to clarify is your question about the scope of the contracts, the sort of the scope of those 4 items and what those 4 items accomplish for us? I'd be happy to talk about that I just want to clarify.
Yeah, because when I look at the dollar values of these, it feels like, deputy, services seems to be more tactical, right? So I guess maybe if I kind of lay it out in a way that you have the categories numbered, category 1 is a high level, and then you go facilitation, and then you go to, perhaps execution, and maybe I'm not getting that 100% correct. So, we have $7.5 million ask for that first category, and then 2.5 for like number 3. So
I think if I could jump in, there's nothing magical about the order of those
Okay.
services. The deputy director is our priority because those services are going to quickly transition into a full-time role for Jim. That's the largest contract capacity. None of the other services at this point would we envision requiring that level of participation. That's why you see the lower contract amount awards that we're considering for those are more on-call services. Whereas the deputy executive director will be a full-time role. We've budgeted that for a full 5-year term, included all the necessary travel costs associated with minimum 2 weeks on-site presence. So that's why the STV incorporated contract amount is higher than the rest. It's for kind of a different type of service. The rest will be on-call as needed services, and the values that we're assigning to those are intended to be sufficient for how we envision utilizing those contracts over the next 5 years, but it'll be on an as needed basis.
I appreciate that additional clarification, and I don't want you to get the idea that I'm not supportive of you needing the tools or getting the tools that you need to run this large ship, if you will. I'm just trying to clarify in my mind the differences in the award amounts.
Totally understood. I appreciate it. So if there's any more I can help convey in terms of the purpose and intent of these contracts, the basis for the award amounts, be happy to.
I think that was a very good question, and it did answer questions that we probably all had. Are there any other questions? Director.
Thank you. Thank you, President Millibar. I think Graham answered most of my question. I was curious on the meaning of the terminology on call, but you've already answered that. We called the deputy executive director position on call as well, but we're going to fund it for full-time participation. Is it still necessary to call that on call, or is that just?
The on-call reference is just a kind of a callback to the original solicitation title, but in reality, that service will not be on call.
Okay. Yeah, that was the source of my questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions on these 3 items before we make motions?
Thank you, President Miller. Not much a question, more just a comment. There's clearly some careful construction of these contracts to support you in the way needed. And, DCA is at a point of maturity now where you're structuring it in such a way to be successful for what's coming. I don't necessarily see explicitly where you have HR support services coming from these 3. Is that determined that wasn't needed, or?
We are sequencing these awards. We're prioritizing these first 3. We will have a batch of another 5 awards teed up for the August board meeting. That's where we will include our recommended vendor for the HR support.
Okay, thank you. But no, in terms of the contracting mechanism where you have task order issued. That's the cost control and expense oversight you're gonna have on these contracts. So I like the idea of providing that, longevity with a particular contractor where you develop the rapport with, but you still have the opportunity to say pivot, change course if it's not working, or if you need support in another way, right?
Yeah, good, very good point. These contracts, just like the rest of our contracts, what you're seeing as a not to exceed amount represents the ceiling within the contract vehicle. But we issue the scope and budget associated with task orders. So we issue that work through task orders, which are essentially an extension of the contract. We have a very high level description of the scope in these master contracts, but then negotiate with the vendors on specific work items. Traditionally, that's been done here at a minimum or maybe maximum annual basis, but these on-call contracts, we will stand up task order scopes and budget as we need them, and then manage them in discrete work scopes.
Okay, so before we make a resolution, is there any public comment on item 7E?
President Millibar, we do not have any public comment requests. I do want to just clarify, there's 3 separate resolutions for
Right.
each of these contracts. So I look to Josh on how we proceed with the recommendation.
Yeah, I'd recommend, we treat them with separate motions and we'll have a public comment period in between. If there's additional questions the board have on an individual contract, we can answer that, but we don't need to, go through a long staff report again, defer to the board.
Yeah, so I'll entertain a motion on the Deputy Executive Director Services Agreement with STV.
President Milbar.
Director Martin.
I would like to make the motion to approve that item, but also to thank the Zone 7 General Manager for helping out on the selection team. Somebody I know we all know and respect, so I'd like to make the motion.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Roll call vote, please. Oh, do we have a public comment or did we already ask that?
Confirming we don't have any public comment requests for this item.
Okay.
And I'll gladly call the roll, starting with President Millibar,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Alternate Director McMillan. Aye. Director Stromera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anaptawi,
Yes.
Director Weed.
Aye.
Thank you. Resolution passes.
Okay, we'll move on to the resolution for 7F, the Strategic and Facilitation Support Services Agreement with Project Neutral. We have a motion on that one, a resolution.
Motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, a second?
Second.
Any public comment?
Let me refresh my screen here. So no public comment request for this item.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, a roll call vote, please.
All right, starting with President Millibar,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Alternate Director McMillan. Aye. Director Stromera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anaptawi,
Yes.
Director Weed.
Aye.
Okay, resolution approved.
Okay. Item 7G, the Strategic Support Services Agreement with CohnReznick. We need a resolution for that one.
I'll make the motion.
A second, please.
Second McMillan.
And no public comment on this one?
No public comment, President Millibar,
Okay. Roll call vote, please.
gladly. President Millibar,
Aye.
Director Martin,
Aye.
Alternate Director McMillan. Aye. Director Stromera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
Director Anaptawi,
Yes.
Director Weed.
Aye.
Okay, resolution approved. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 8, reports. Before we start, we will take public comment on the reports and announcements now. If you'd like to make a report, let Mrs. Rodriguez know. Any public comment on item 8?
President Millibar, we do not have any public comment requests for any of the staff reports.
Okay, very good. Thank you. First report is with the general counsel.
Thanks, President Millibar. As noted in my written report, the majority of our work this month was supporting both the agenda items and related budget development. So I don't have anything additional to add, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions of Josh on this item? No questions. We'll move on to item B is the treasurer's report.
Good afternoon. So I also have the financial statements for the last 2 months of April and May through May 31, 2025 attached. And included in that is our invoices paid, aging schedules, accounts receivables, and just to let you know that since then we had a balance of roughly 980,731 as of May 31, 2025. And I can take any questions you might want at this time.
Are there any questions on the treasurer's report? There's a admin.
Thank you, President Millar. Just real quick, Catano, when do you expect, or is there going to be a need for the DCA to carry any reserves or anything like that that may start to trigger things like, investments under the investment policy or requirements under the cash flow? I'm just curious kind of how you see things changing in the next couple of years, if at all.
Well, so if you see that report in the second paragraph towards the end, the only money that we actually keep to anticipate items that we have to pay is that $800,000. What happens right now is that when we receive invoices, we add up the invoices, we let the DCO know about it, and then they will send us money. So it's almost the same way that Graham has to do his budget. We don't hold any money. All the money sits with DCO. So to the extent that this becomes a big project, we might have to revisit that notion because we shouldn't be especially when you have big vendors, that becomes problematic because we don't hold any money. And it's been working out, I guess, because they want to control the money, but we might have to revisit how much money we hold, how we invest, especially when we have project dollars. I would want to have project dollars treated very differently than the O&M money. But right now, we keep very little. It comes in, except for that $800,000. We request money as we get the invoices.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Catano.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the treasurer's report? Hearing none, we move on to the communications report.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, President Millibar. And we've just got a brief few slides here to go through. And my name is Janet Barbieri. Again, I'm the communications lead for program-wide communications. So just a few things to update you on, and I'm sure you remember this from a couple of weeks ago, but in just a few updates, there was that press release on May 15th after your special board meeting, offering support for the governor's various proposals. So thank you all for taking the time and action to do that. On the next one, and Carrie will talk more about other updates, but there were, for the change of point of diversion, there were hearings earlier in June. Those have concluded. There are other dates set in August, September, and October. And of course, from a comm side, supporting information going out about that. We do have updates on the DWR website, just, to provide people with a summary of, the various days of the hearings, sort of what happened and where to find information. And everyone, DWR and DCA participated at the Aqua Conference. And of course, the DCA staff attended the booth and staffed that booth. And it's just continues to be a really helpful opportunity to connect with people a couple times a year. Especially people walking the floor of that exhibit hall and, just chatting with people. So appreciate the teams spending the time at that booth because it's really helpful. And then the price of a drop. So in May, the DCA attended the California Water Association's Spring Policy Symposium, and their theme this year was the price of a drop. That was in Sacramento. And again, another opportunity to meet with industry experts and just have really good conversations. And so, we continue to look for opportunities to do these conferences, whether it's booths or, sitting on a panel or just giving a briefing. So we've got a pretty good list of what those are. For example, we went to AWE, the Association for Women in Water and the Environment. It's great, well-attended presentation. For example, there's the SoCal BIA's conference later this summer, maybe it's early fall. So we continue to look for those. But if you ever come across anything that you think we ought to be at, definitely let us know. And there's a few updated fact sheets. These are, you'll remember, all of the member agencies have their own fact sheets. So there's some new ones that are out there. We continue to update those as they come in. And, there's just a few remaining ones to get posted. And there is the cost containment fact sheet. So if everyone hasn't seen that, that's available on the website. It goes into some detail about the cost containment measures that the DCA is taking. It does a really good job of doing that because there's a lot of really good information out there. And in fact, I'll just take this opportunity to mention that Graham was also participated in a podcast the other day. It's not posted yet, but it will be up soon, I think in the next few days. And this is with Eastern Municipal Water District. They have a podcast called The Drop. And Carla Namath and for the benefit cost analysis, David Sunding, they did that last year as well. It's just a really good venue. And so Graham did that with the Eastern GM. So you'll see that published pretty soon. And that was it for that part of the presentation. I'll just very briefly mention there's a few other things in addition to the conferences that we participate in. We also have our contractor out working in the Delta. So they try to and attend various in-Delta events, so farmers markets and festivals. They've got a great booth set up, and it's the same kind of thing that we do at Aqua in terms of taking advantage of the foot traffic and just giving information to people, trying to raise awareness, asking any questions they have, pointing them in the right direction. Like, here's a website to go to. There's a lot of information out there about water, and so they do a really good job of trying to, help demystify that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is just an update on the missed opportunities number. So, we continue to update that on the website. And this is the sort of the theoretical diversions if we had the DCP in place. And we're at about 956,000 acre feet for this water year. So it's a good example of, what this project could do. So that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on the communications report? No questions. Thank you for your presentation. Item D, DWR Environmental Manager, Carrie Buckman.
Thank you, President Millibar. We reached a pretty big milestone last week on the environmental side where we finished our case in chief at the state board. So as a quick reminder of the process that we're going through with our water rights hearing, we are seeking a change in point of diversion. And the way that the hearing moves is that we first make our case in chief, and that's what we wrapped up last week. Next, the protestants will make their case in chief. And then after that, both sides will be able to have rebuttal to rebut whatever the other parties might have said. So the protestants' case in chief materials are due to the board on July 11th, and then the hearing is scheduled to resume in August. There is a request for delay for those, and the hearing officer has not yet ruled on that. So we'll keep up to date on that. So between now and July 11th, this process has a bit of a down period. We've got some administrative things that are going on in terms of providing data to the hearing officer and around exhibit management, but for the most part, this will really start up again in earnest in July and August. And other permitting news, on the California Endangered Species Act side, we received our incidental take permit in February. And that permit has a lot of things that we need to start. So we are working on those, really planning out the studies that we need to implement and looking at how they incorporated the compensatory mitigation that we had identified in the EIR. They did make some changes, and so we are trying to incorporate all of that and have our mitigation plan up to date. And finally, the Delta Stewardship Council, we are working on our certification of consistency with the Delta plan, and we're looking to submit that before the end of this year. I think those are the big updates. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Carrie? No questions? No. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say, thank you for all the hard work that you all, the department and, the legal staff, put into, the case in chief. I could just only imagine, the late nights, that, and, for the homework assignments that you had to pull. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, last item, 8E. Any verbal reports that anyone wants to make? No reports. Future agenda items unlisted. So we're adjourned.